What if you found out that people were talking about you and it wasn't nice? Because the place where I talked about this was at a women's business club. And I thought, how ironic. And then I wanted to know who said it. I wanted to know who said it so that I could judge them. And that's not my standard for myself. I'm not available for that. Well, this happened to me recently, and I'm going to share what I did because it might surprise you. Hold the standard and not the outcome is something that I talk about often. It's a critical piece of identity work, and it's challenging because it is usually especially tested and hard when there is pressure. It's those moments when you feel challenged or you feel misunderstood. And no matter what level you are at, no matter how much success you have had, there are times when you will feel challenged because, as I like to say, life is going to life. And it happened to me. The other day, something was brought to my attention that there was a group of people that belonged to a business club that were away together. A comment had been made about me, and that comment was eventually shared with me. The comment was that I tend to talk about my work too much, that I talk about my coaching too much. And that's what I want to speak to. I'm not speaking about this to correct it or change it, but because it's a beautiful, clean example of what we're talking about and the work that I do inside of my container. When something like that reaches you, there's a very small window where your mind decides what it means. And it can read it as criticism. It can read it as feedback. It might be something that you feel you need to adjust with yourself, or it could just really register as someone else's perspective. So let me tell you where I went. In that moment, I first went to confusion because the place where I talked about this was at a women's business club. And I thought, how ironic. And then I wanted to know who said it. And if I'm honest, I wanted to know who said it so that I could judge them. I could give them a piece of my mind, in my mind, of course. But honestly, those thoughts moved pretty quickly, much faster than it would have in the past. I realized, honestly, there's nothing I need to defend. I don't have to soften anything or reframe anything about the way that I show up. This was simply information about how something I do is being perceived by someone. Something that, although the person may not like, they've never spoken to me about it, but rather spoke to others in a group setting. And that's perfectly fine. That is okay. In the past, when I heard something like that, I would have adjusted and started to monitor myself. Can you relate to that? Because I would have made myself small. I would have edited how I talk about what I do. I would have shrunk because I would have been so uncomfortable at the idea of being misunderstood and at the idea of not being liked. So let's come back to standards now. A standard is not something that you hold only when it is well received, when everybody is applauding and loving you. It is something that remains when that's not happening because it's not based on consensus. It's not shaped by external reaction. It's actually a way of being that does not reorganize itself based on how it is interpreted. Here is what I realized about this whole situation. The fact that I was being talked about is actually a marker of visibility and influence. I'm confident and articulate about my work. I'm comfortable with speaking about the impact I create and the transformation that happens for my clients in these moments. In fact, my clients are my why. And you can actually hear how their lives have changed in an episode that I did where we were celebrating 6 years of morning calls and this type of work. The link is in the description, or you can click the top of your screen. So now in this moment, I have an opportunity to decide who I be. How do I meet the moment? Because like I said before, the temptation can be to unconsciously shrink and talk less about my work or distance myself from my clients, because I have clients who are members at this club, or become overly cautious in conversations. But shrinking would mean allowing someone else's discomfort to shape my behavior. And that's not my standard for myself. I'm not available for that. And here's the truth. I actually don't even have enough context about the situation. I don't really know what the whole conversation was about and exactly what was said. How I inevitably held the situation was that my work and my presence are visible enough to be noticed and discussed. And if people want to spend their time at an event talking about me, that is perfectly fine. If I speak about my work, it is because it's what I do. It's what I've built. This has been over 2 decades, and this is the work that I am daily in, and it produces extraordinary results in people's lives. There's no performance in that. There's no attempt to convince. It's simply consistent with who I am and how I operate. So holding the standard in this case looks like greeting people warmly, continuing to talk about my work naturally, and staying relaxed and grounded. This was really a moment for me. In a way, it was a bit of a test. Am I going to stay and hold this visibility? And the truth is, yeah, I am. Because let's face it, as my platform grows, more people will have opinions. And so my work is to hold my center and my standards. There is a difference between awareness and adjustment. So you can be aware of how you are perceived without altering who you are. Most people collapse those two things together. The moment that they become aware, they begin to change. And a lot of times it is completely unconscious. And that's where internal inconsistency starts to show up. So what's actually happening in those moments have very little to do with the content of the feedback in my case. It's really about whether you remain with yourself when there is no agreement or no understanding or even mild disappointment. Most people are not responding to the situation. They are responding to the interpretation of the situation. And then without realizing it, they begin to organize around that interpretation instead of around their own clarity. There's a difference between holding a standard and managing an outcome. When you are managing an outcome, you are subtly adjusting yourself to preserve approval and acceptance, to be liked. It's a people-pleasing kind of thing to do. You become more measured, more cautious, and more filtered because you're trying to say what you think somebody else will approve of. And you're not lying, but honestly, you're not fully expressed either. It's not the whole you that is showing up. When you're holding a standard, your orientation is really different. You're not indifferent to others. It's not that you're cold, but you are not controlled by them. Your expression remains consistent with who you are, not with how it will be received. And that may be confronting for some people. There's also a deeper layer here that I want to touch on, and that's around responsibility. I am responsible for the clarity of what I say, being in integrity, whole and complete, and the standard that I hold. I am not responsible for how someone else interprets it or what they choose to make it mean. That belongs to them. Many people in those moments take on more than is theirs. They try to, again, it's like softening their presence so that it's easier for others to digest. And they also may try to start anticipating how they may be perceived and then start to adjust ahead of time. Holding a standard does not remove awareness. It does not mean that you ignore what is being said, but it means that you can hear it without becoming it. And you can think about your thinking of it. There's also a certain level of restraint that comes with this. And the restraint is actually, interestingly enough, it's not to over-explain. It's really not to justify your position. And in my case, not to get the person's name. That was the restraint I was dealing with. The restraint is to let what is true stand without additional effort or to make it more acceptable. That restraint is often what we can feel is so hard to hold on to because there's this like short-term gratification in the non-restraint actions. But when this happens and you start to live this way, you stop second guessing yourself and revising yourself and negotiating with yourself. And here's the thing, you create a better relationship with yourself. A standard is not revealed in agreement, it is revealed in the absence of it. And I see this so often in the work with my clients. It can look like this. Someone makes a decision that is aligned, but begins explaining it in multiple ways so that it will land better. Another sets a boundary, and the moment it creates disappointment, it softens. Someone else leads a team and makes a clear call, but begins to question themselves as soon as it is challenged. In each case, the surface looks different, but the movement underneath is the same. The standard is not being held, it's being negotiated. And the negotiation is rarely conscious and it is fast. It happens as a form of protection. Protection of an old identity as someone who needs to be liked and understood. But the cost of that protection is internal inconsistency. You begin to relate yourself through the lens of how others are receiving you rather than through the clarity of who you are. And then what is actually happening in those moments has very little to do with the decision itself. It's about whether the person remains with themselves when there is no immediate agreement. Oh my gosh. Okay, so we also talked about the deeper level around responsibility, and that's at play here as well, is that you're also taking responsibility for who you be in those moments and the standard that you hold. And many people at that time, that's when they abandon themselves. And it's that abandonment is an expression of the old identity, of an old way of being. And I was faced with that. I mean, trust me, I had a moment where I wanted to know the name. But again, it was fleeting. It came quickly and it left quickly because of this work and because I know who I am. So I'm no longer over functioning. And this is leadership. This is when you are not trying to control every outcome. You're not trying to manage something that is misaligned. And in doing so, you are really holding the room, not only the standard, but you're holding the room. Now, I know all of this sounds really good, but I want to tell you, it does not mean that it removes discomfort. And it doesn't mean that you don't feel any tension, of being misunderstood or the weight of someone else's reaction or somebody not liking you. But it means that that does not control you. Are you getting the difference here? You can remain steady. You can remain the essential and you can still remain love, right? And greet people warmly and not shut down. And there is such a quiet strength in allowing someone to have their reaction without needing to intervene, without needing to fix, explain, or resolve it. And this requires trust. And it's not just in yourself, but it's in others as well. Trust that they are capable, even in that group, that other people are capable of processing and, thinking about their interactions with me, deciding how they are interpreting it. And I've just got to trust that people who know me. And people may not always agree with me, but I can remain steady and grounded regardless of that. And I also don't require, it's not a requirement that people agree or like me. So this is really honestly where the standards become visible. It's not through affirmations or declarations. It is in those moments. Hey, someone was saying something about you, and this is what they were saying. Who do you be? It's the way that you hold yourself when things are smooth and when they are not. And honestly, life becomes real simple because you get to reduce the internal noise. Years ago, oh my gosh, that would have kept me up at night. I would have been seething. I would have been playing this out in my head over and over and over again. There was a version of me that would not have been able to let this go. So if you have a friend and they were telling you about something that happened and you think this could help them to reframe it or understand it in a different way, will you do me a favor and send them this episode right now? Also, if you're watching this on YouTube and you have not subscribed yet, please subscribe to the channel because it helps us reach more people. And as always, if you're on Spotify, Apple, or another platform, download, rate, review, do all of the things, and I will see you here next time. Bye for now.